highest refugee Shabbat, which was this past Shabbat, involved 200 shuls nationally across the United States, and everybody did different things, and really it was wonderful. In Westchester, we had 30 shuls who participated. Some had speakers come, some did special tefillot. We have the study session, and we also did a campaign, which people can still donate to if you'd like, a campaign for gift cards for new immigrants that from Amazon. Highest is going to distribute $10, $20 gift cards to new immigrants to help them with purchasing essential items for getting started here. So this is, I think, the 6th year that there's been a highest national refugee Shabbat, and it's wonderful that it's growing and that we're participating. And thank you, Aaron. Thank you for giving us the learning component of it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So thank you, Rena, for that introduction. And with that, we're gonna start. I'm gonna start the little study group we're gonna have right now. This is a participatory study session. I have materials obviously prepared for us to look at together. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Aaron Steinberg. I live in the neighborhood. I am, in some senses, a professional educator, but I am by no means a Jewish studies scholar. I'm a Jewish studies student. And so the things I'm bringing here are things that I have discovered, and I want to help unpack with all of you. I think there are going to be insights for us all to find together. Those of you who've come to sessions that group study sessions I've led before know that the strength of the experience comes from the group sharing. So I hope you're ready to share. Oh, the last thing I'll note is everything we're going to want to look at, I do have on a slide or a screen share, but if you have a Chumash with the 5 books, we're going to be reading a whole chapter in Shemot and a whole chapter in Bamidbar, or at least like looking at lots of different parts of it. So I'll be sharing it, but it'll be like scrolling as we do. But if you want your own copy to look at, it's not a bad idea to grab that. And the intro is a few minutes of like filler. So if you want to get up now, you're not going to miss all that much. All right. And with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. When Rena asked me to do this, let me know, is that screen share coming through all right?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. When Rena asked me to teach this class for National Refugee Shabbat, I was very excited to do that. And I said, I'll definitely get working on that. And then a few weeks later, she said, okay, Aaron, we're ready for the title of that class. And I said, oh, the class I didn't start preparing yet? Perfect. Let me give you a title and then I'll figure out what the class is going to be. And I came up with this title, The Lazy Immigrant Myth, from Biblical Time Until Today. I was trying to think about the fact that we'll talk a little bit about refugees in specific, but obviously refugees are just a special case subcategory of immigrants in general. And there's a lot of misperceptions about immigrants and refugees. And I was curious to see if there were similar concerns or hesitations around other groups of people who maybe would have encountered the Jewish people throughout history in ways that they would have been considered similarly maligned, like the lazy immigrant stereotype that persists today. So it's National Refugee Shabbat week. What is a refugee? I brought here the UN definition. Refugees are people who have fled war, violence, conflict, or persecution, and have crossed an international border to find safety in another country. Okay? People who, in need, have to go from one place to another. They're leaving where they're from because they can't stay there, and they're trying to go somewhere else because they think it's going to be safer or they'll be able to survive. It's pretty straightforward. It's a pretty simple definition. There are obviously a lot of legal technicalities, and those of you who may be following the news at various points, there's issues where do you have to declare and request refugee asylum from the country that you're being oppressed in? Can you claim refugee status when you've arrived somewhere else? What if you're in a third country and you want to get to, you've gone from your home country to another country and now you're trying to get to a third country. Can you still claim that you're a refugee from the first place, even if you're not there anymore? There's a lot of complicated things when it gets to the US law and international law, but it's essentially someone who's fleeing for their lives. And I was concerned that Roxanne might join us. So I brought like the whole US code that I could find on it. I know there is at least one or two lawyers on the call. So I'll send you that slide afterwards. I'm sure you want to read it. So it's called the lazy immigrant myth. I'm not saying that I want to go down, this isn't like, let's list every bad stereotype we've heard about about immigrants. But I'm just curious, like when people in the news, or when people hear, oh, there's lots of immigrants coming up. I'm not getting into politics, by the way, but again, just in the current events, they're saying there are many immigrants coming up right now. Happens to be the case. Not the why are they coming, but about the fact that they're coming. What do people say? What are some of the things that you might hear in public discourse, sitting around with people? If you're in like a diverse group of people, what are some of the opinions you might hear about people who are talking about immigrants coming? This is a real open question. This is not a rhetorical question. I'm waiting for people to unmute. What do people think when they or say when they hear about immigrants coming to America?
I'll go. I would say like courageous
Okay.
for sort of taking on an arduous journey to get from one place to a new place. Like that there's.
Great. Okay.
How about that they're taking the resources of our country without making a contribution, like, whether it's sort of through a welfare state system or healthcare or something like that, without actually participating in the economy.
Okay.
I think
great.
The bigger worry is the opposite of laziness. I think it's like they're very hardworking and they're gonna take my job. They're gonna work harder than I work for less money. Isn't that a bigger worry?
Yeah, but people may not say it in that kind of a way, right?
If only they were lazy, right?
Right.
Or they say both.
Right.
Well,
I think there's also
Yeah.
something about the fact that they're desperate, that like
Yeah.
we link in our minds someone who's desperate to something negative, like they must be the bottom of the society where they're coming from because they're so desperate. And so they're not as desirable because they're desperate.
Yeah, or unskilled or uneducated comes along with that as a conception, not necessarily, not a reality, but a conception.
Yeah, I love this. These answers have been great because, again, we're talking about people we don't know. No, like by definition, well, not by definition, but we're talking about groups of people who are coming from another place. We know nothing about them. We barely know anything about them as like a collective, let alone as individuals. Yet people form all these opinions, and I know people weren't saying that these were their opinions, and that's not what I asked for. And it brings to mind a phrase that I read about, and it turns out if you Google it, there's even like people have made plenty of images about this. It's Schrodinger's immigrant. It's a person who lounges around all day on welfare while simultaneously stealing your job. Right? We have the lazy immigrant who steals our job. We have Idana's courageous fighter who's risen up from the challenges to make it here. And you also have the bottom of the barrel, they're sending us our worst, right? Like that was meant, I think Kara suggested that one, that people say that, right? They're whatever we want them to be. They become a political football, they become a rhetorical football. And if you want immigrants to be something good, then you paint them that way. If you want them to be something bad, you paint them that way. In reality, there's some of both. We're not here to talk about the politics of immigration, but I want us to be critical of the perceptions that we hear and we think of and that we see in the public, because we're about to read a similar story in the Torah, and I'm curious to hear how we interpret the story, similar to how in public perception we might appreciate immigrants. Okay, so we're going to go back. We're going to hop in our time machine back to the times of Tanakh. And again, for those of you who joined later, we're going to be reading a lot in the Torah, in Shemot and Bamidbar. If you want to grab a Chumash, it might be easier to follow along, but I'll have everything on screen as well.
That's great. I don't think so.
Who were the heir of Rav? This is also not a rhetorical question. In Tanakh, it's mentioned once that there were a people referred to as the Erev Rav. Who would like to help us figure out who they were, or remind us who they were? Any brave souls?
If I remember correctly, I think they're the hangers on who sort of joined with the Israelites during the Exodus, who kind of, I guess, sort of jumped on the coattails and left Egypt together.
Okay, great.
They're Egyptians, like they're actually Egyptians, like kind of converts from, or like people who just want to be with the Jews instead of Egypt.
Okay, great. I want if more people want to say things, that's great. But I want to just point out. So Idana got us into the right the time frame and the part of the story. We're talking about Exodus from Egypt. There's some people who left with the Jewish people. Already we've got a couple different interpretations going on here. Idana says that they kind of were took advantage of the Exodus to like sneak out the door. Michelle maybe was saying a little bit more of they kind of wanted to join Team Israelite. Any other initial impressions before we meet them in the text?
So a midrash was shared at my table by my 8-year-old, which I had actually not really been familiar with, which was that Erev Rav were essentially responsible for Chet HaEgel and sort of stirring that up.
Great, Mark. Thank you. Yeah, let's put a pin in that because we're definitely gonna come back to that, right? Yeah, let's put a pin in that. Awesome. Okay, so this is the pasuk where and I apologize. It seems like my Hebrew slides have lost all their spaces, so it's like a really original Torah text. We don't even have the spaces between words, let alone Nikudot or anything like that. I'm going to switch to Sefaria very soon, so it'll be easier from there on. But this is well, I guess I brought 2 verses here, but there's one verse, one time in all of Torah, and I think all of Tanakh, where it says the phrase Erev Rav together. And I'm going to read it to you now, the 2 verses. Vayisu v'nei Israel me'Ramses Sukkota Keshesh meot elef raglei hagvarim levad mitaf. Okay, the Israelites were heading out from Ramses to Sukkot. This is after the splitting of the Red Sea. There are about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children and presumably women and women. V'gam Erev Rav ala itam v'tzon uvakar mikneh kaved meod. And moreover, a mixed multitude, which is how sometimes it's translated, went up with them, and very much livestock, both flocks and herds. Okay, the Erev Rav. Erev meaning a mixture, theoretically. Rav being some greatness, a lot, many. Okay, a great mixture, seemingly of people, presumably of people went out with them. Any thoughts or comments on this text? And then at this moment, the phrasing or any questions on the words here? And again, I apologize for the spaces. Okay. So what I want to do is jump into the parak where this happens, and we're going to see in the narrative exactly how the Erev Rav develop and what happens with them after they join up with Bnei Israel. And we're going to see what the Mefarshim have to say about them as well. So for those of you in their Chumashim, we're going to Shemot 12:29, Yud-Bet, Parak Yud-Bet, Pasuk Chaf Tet. With permission, I'm going to read it for us. Oh, of course, I lost my pasuk. Okay, I'm going to do I'm going to be reading the English, paraphrasing the English. You can feel free to look at the Hebrew, but I want us to understand the story that we're going through here. This is not necessarily more than specific words, although if you have specific words you want to harp on, that's great. I want to think about the story arc that we're going to be exploring here. Okay, so we're going back to the night of the death of the firstborn. In the middle of the night, the Lord struck down all the firstborn of Egypt, from the firstborn of Paro, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Paro arose in the night with all his courtiers and all the Egyptians, because there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there was not someone dead. He summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, "Up, depart from among my people, you and the Israelites with you. Go, worship the Lord as you said. Take also your flocks and your herds as you said, and be gone, and may you bring a blessing upon me also." The Egyptians urged the people on, impatient to have them leave the country, for they said, "We shall be dead." Sorry, I got to pop up. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls wrapped in their cloaks upon their shoulders. The Israelites had done Moses' bidding and borrowed from the Egyptians objects of silver and gold and clothing. And the Lord disposed the Egyptians favorably toward the people, and they let them have their request. Thus they stripped the Egyptians. Okay, so death of the firstborn. The Egyptians are crying. They are saying, "Get out of here. We're done with you. Here's some money, here's some gold, get out." The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot with about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. Moreover, a mixed multitude went up with them. Here's the Erev Rav. A mixed multitude went up with them, and very much livestock, both flocks and herds. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough that they had taken out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, since they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. The length of time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years, and the end of the 430th year to the very day, all the ranks of the Lord departed from the land of Egypt. Now, forgive me, we're going to go about 10 more psukim and then recap. So now again, they're getting out of Egypt, they've made their matzah, and now it's recapping. We've been here for a long time. I know there's a lot of debate about how long they were actually there, 430 years. We're not going to be exploring that, but that's where we're recapping here. And now there's a little message that's going to come up. That was for the Lord a night of vigil, the night of leaving Egypt, to bring them out of the land of Egypt. That same night is the Lord's, one of vigil for all the children of Israel throughout the ages, right? Pesach is the holiday that it's coming up. We celebrate it every year. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the law of the Passover offering. No foreigner shall eat of it, but any slave a man has bought may eat of it once he's been circumcised. No bound or hired laborer shall eat of it. It shall be eaten in one house. You shall not take any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break a bone of it. The whole community of Israel shall offer it. If a stranger who dwells with you would offer the Passover to the Lord, all his males must be circumcised. Then he shall be admitted to offer it. He shall then be as a citizen of the country, but no uncircumcised person may eat of it. There shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you." All the Israelites did so as the Lord had commanded. Moses and Aaron, so they did. That very day, the Lord freed the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop. That's the end of the parak. So after we have the death of the firstborn, the preparations to leave, the Egyptians urging to get them out, we break, and we have the Korban Pesach, the mitzvah of sacrificing a lamb, eating it as a family. We have intricate laws here about who can eat it, and then the laws summarize themselves as everyone followed the mitzvah as God had commanded them, and then they left. And this is it. So this is it. This whole story, this Erev Rav, these people, these mixed multitudes of people who we still don't know who they are, show up in the middle of this story. Any thoughts on who they are, what they are? Any questions or comments on this, on these psukim that we read, that we want to dive into at this point before we read some of the Mefarshim?
Yeah, Aaron.
Yeah.
I noticed that it says, very explicitly that God took the Israelites out. So there's, if the people are going out, it does seem to say that they're in some way the Israelites. And then it talks about how there are these people who are quasi-Israelites, like they're slaves and they're circumcised strangers who are sort of considered as Israelites. So that does kind of seem like, okay, God took out the Israelites. These people are also Israelites. Not quite Israelites, but they're kind of Israelites. So maybe that's who it's talking about.
Yeah. Attendance. The way we've been taking attendance during this whole Exodus is very unclear. Who are all the people? Who's being taken out? Only Israelites? Is anyone who leaves considered an Israelite? They're all headed to Israel, maybe. Maybe they all get that title at some point. But there's also recognition, yeah. Right.
I mean, and if you go back to the pasuk, you have Rav and you have cattle. They're grouped together, and so that gives you some sense of property-ishness, and certainly otherness.
You're saying that the Erev Rav are associated with the cattle, and they're combined with them in the pasuk means there's something. It's a different category.
Israel, and we have an exact number of the Bnei Israel who leave, and then we have the other things that, the other entities that exit with them, including the animal life and people who are not counted as the people.
Right. Which can cut both ways in some ways, right? In some ways it's saying these are other people, they're also here, they're worth mentioning, but it's not the core. There's also the fact that they're mixed up with the flocks and the livestock may also imply a degree of wealth or resources that the Erev Rav are bringing with them as well, right? Maybe the Erev Rav are the ones bringing the livestock and the cattle. Because the Vigam, right? If we are going to look carefully at some of the Hebrew language, it's very interesting, right? Vayisu b'nei Israel miram seis. They all left Egypt and their children, and okay. Vigam, now it's like there's a separate list, and aside from the Bnei Israel, there's Erev Rav, Vitzon, Uvakar, Mikneh, Kaved, and all the cattle and livestock. And how that's connected could be an interesting. There's room for interpretation there, which we're gonna dive into. Any other thoughts before we look at? Yeah.
Yeah, I found it interesting that the later part that you read, V'chi agorit chager, right? So then when a stranger lives with you, on the one hand, it's sort of typical of the Bible to have like narrative and law interwoven that way, but it does strike me as odd, right? Here you have Bnei Israel escaping from being strangers in this land, and we're already talking about, well, what happens when a stranger is living amongst you? Like that's not halacha l'maaseh, we would say. Like it probably wasn't happening at that moment, unless maybe the Erev Rav was already giving an example of that in real time.
Exactly. It's a really important pasuk. Why in this moment are we talking about how to incorporate other people into our society and how we live amongst people who are not necessarily part of our own? Now, there's at least two great explanations. And the first one is, well, we're leaving Egypt. We just experienced this. And God is saying, hey, you might be focused only on your liberation. You might be focused only on escaping Paro. Don't forget, you were strangers and you might encounter strangers down the road. Another, or maybe a fully combined explanation is, in the same moment that they're being liberated, they are then becoming the entity that is surrounding itself with others who might gain a second-class status in this new Israelite society. Simultaneous with their exodus is this elevation in status or some sort of new power dynamic being formed, and God is saying, okay, you haven't even stepped foot out of Egypt yet, but you have to realize now you're in a position of power. You have to think about your relationship to other people who might be living around you. It's a fantastic point, Michael. Okay. I want to look at the Mefarshim on Pasuk Lamed Chet, which is our mixed multitude, and say the rabbis read this. It's a weird phrase. V'gam Erev Rav alai itam. If we're just reading this with no context, with no background knowledge, we might have literally no knowledge what this means. Like the rabbi said, maybe it means it's lumped together with the cattle. Maybe Erev Rav literally means like, I don't know, all the tchotchkes, all the stuff that they brought from them. They grabbed whatever they could and they got out of there. Maybe that meant, like other enslaved people. Maybe it meant a bunch of riches or supplies or everything. Maybe it literally could literally just mean a whole bunch of junk that they brought with them. But that's not what the rabbis thought. That's not what the story implies. And let's read a little bit about what the rabbis thought. I did not fully plan how to share screens with reading the Mefarshim, and let's see how this works. Okay, that works, all right. Rashi, and let's see if we can get the Hebrew in it. Oh, okay, only one or the other. Rashi says very simply, who was the Erev Rav? A mingling of various nations who had become proselytes, converts, right? Tarovet umot shel gerim. So a number of different nations, meaning people from different subcultures within Egyptian society or other sort of absorbed nationalities who had been living in Egypt under the rule of Paro, they wanted to convert. And theoretically, seemingly, when Rashi uses Gerim, I'm going to assume, although it's probably open to interpretation, it means they wanted to join. They wanted to be a part of it. They weren't, whether that means they wanted to convert and literally become Jewish, maybe that's what it meant. And there are some Mefarshim and some that we're going to see later that implies that they really wanted to join the team fully. Or maybe it meant they wanted to have some sort of resident status. They wanted to follow along and eventually maybe have some sort of, resident alien status wherever these Israelites were heading. Okay, that's what Rashi wants us to say. Any thoughts on Rashi? Anytime you want to talk, just unmute and start talking. Okay, let's look at another one of our Farshim. Sforno. We got English? Yeah. Of the mixed multitude who were leaving Egypt with the Israelites to take up residence among them together with all their belongings. Okay, so it's a slight different interpretation. It's similar. It's a bunch of people who want to leave Egypt with them. So not necessarily saying we want to be Jewish. We want to live with you. We want to follow you. We want to be with you. Lagor betocham, as the Hebrew says. Im kol kinyanam. And that's where we might, I want to suggest that there's a possible interpretation where these were actually people of means. Maybe they'd been oppressed by the Egyptians, but they had stuff. Maybe they had all this bakar, all this cattle and livestock that they were bringing with them. So it's not exactly converts. They weren't trying to be Jewish, but they were another group of people who wanted to leave Egypt at the same time as the Israelites. And they said, maybe let's take advantage of this opportunity, or let's join forces, or whatever it is, and let's all get out of here together.
So
okay,
are we saying that these are Egyptian people?
Sforno doesn't seem to say. Again, the mixed multitude could mean it was random people. It could mean it was an assortment of different nationalities. Sforno doesn't seem to.
Egyptian people who would have at the moment been mourning the losses of their firstborn sons, who would.
There's, again, this is definitely one area where I sort of dip my toe in, but I can't say I really have any expertise. There's a belief that there's no reason to assume that the Israelites were the only subnationality within Egyptian culture. It was a mega empire. Presumably there were other nations that sort of had maintained their national identities, but had been subsumed by the Egyptian government. And so presumably it's them. So they're not part of the ruling class of Egyptians. They may or may not have been afflicted by the Makot if the same way as the Egyptians and were. But they were citizens of Egypt or residents of Egypt, and it's them who left, presumably. Or maybe it was Egyptians who said, Pharaoh led us down the bad path. He had a bad policy. I lost my firstborn son because of Pharaoh. Let's get out of here. That's possible also. Okay. Let's look at the Ibn Ezra. Oh, is the Ibn Ezra going to be here? No, so let's hold off on the Ibn Ezra.
I think you scrolled past it. It was up above.
I did?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you. Is it under?
It's like all the way at the top.
Yeah, all the way at the top.
Oh, of course it is. Thank you. The popular ones are on top. Okay. They were Egyptians that mixed in with the Jewish people. They were the rabbles that were amongst them. Okay, let's look at the Hebrew. Me'anshe Mitzrayim. So now it seems like if we're talking about who of these people were they still could have been maybe Egyptian residents, but maybe even they were legit 100% Egyptians. Shehit arev imahem. So it's not that they were a mixed group of people who joined along following with the Israelites. They were mixed in within the Israelites. Some even interpret this as saying that they were hiding among the Israelites, or trying to blend in, not blend in so they could sneak away from Egypt necessarily, but blend in and subvert the culture of the Israelite people as they're leaving Egypt. And now we have a very important phrase as we're going to continue our exploration and study of who the Erev Rav are. V'hem ha'asafsuf shene'esfu alehem. And if we read this on its own, you're like, what does that mean? They were the rabbles that were amongst them. And it uses in the Hebrew, Ibn Ezra, ha'asafsuf shene'esfu, the rabblers who rabbled or something, asaf, I guess means to like gather or like collect. I don't know. They were like manipulating things, the manipulators, the rabblers. What does that mean? Asafsuf shene'esfu alehem. And if you know the secret answer, hold on just 1 second.
Where they like stir the pot?
Okay, so maybe they were pot stirrers, right? Exactly. They were troublemakers. Mark suggested earlier, and we're gonna get back to that the Erev Rav were blamed by some or many as being the cause of the Egel HaZahav, the ones who like kind of got that problem going. But it's actually even the people who say that it's not the that does come first. They caused that trouble. Any other thoughts on ha'asafsuf shene'esfu? It's weird phraseology.
Have to go to Balota.
Right. So the rabbi knew the secret answer. The asafsuf, it's actually a reference to a specific pasuk elsewhere in the Torah. I'm going to hop back to my slides for a second, and we're going to look at that together. Okay, so who exactly were they? And let's just recap here. This includes some sources that I saw referenced in other places, but didn't have them. They're not in Sefaria. So the Erev Rav. Here are possibilities that different rabbis. Most of these are whatever. I'm blanking on the word. Like older Mefarshim from the Rishonim, thank you, and some
I got you, babe.
But then there's also I've on the bottom I have a contemporary rabbi as well. So we have Rashi again, who said that they were righteous is maybe a bit generous, but righteous Gentiles who wanted to convert and join the Israelites. Right? Rashi assigns no negative connotation to what they were doing. The Or HaChaim we didn't read, but it lines up with the Ibn Ezra of the troublemakers, is that they were spies sent by Paro to break the will of the Israelites, right? That's the sort of shit that they got themselves embedded in the Israelite culture because they wanted to mess things up. And maybe like Paro sent them saying like, they're leaving. I'm not going to, I mean, he did chase them, but like, aside from chasing them, I'm also going to set in these people among them to, destroy their whatever club plans they have, and then they'll come running back to me. Sforno, and this is my interpretation, right? Wealthy non-Jews who wanted to leave Egypt, kind of along with them. We had our Ibn Ezra, the rabble rousers and troublemakers, the Asaf Suf. The Shadal is like I can't even say exactly. I can't say anything about who the Shadal was. I don't know, but says that they were like the children or the offspring of interfaith or intercultural couples, so like Israelite, Egyptian, Jewish, Egyptian relationships had children, and that's why they were called mixed multitudes, and they ended up with these sort of half Jewish or not entirely Jewish people who also maybe when Israelites were leaving, the Egyptians looked at them and say, you too, you can't stay here, you're half Jewish, and we want all the Israelites out of here, so you got to go too. Or maybe they said, we feel connected to the movement of the Israelites leaving because we're part Israelite, and they wanted to come along, but they weren't counted as Israelites, and so they kind of hung around the back. These are all possibilities. And then a modern interpretation here from Rabbi Plout is another group of people who were subjected by the Egyptians who wanted to follow the Israelites to freedom, who were sort of inspired by this revolutionary air that was going on and said, hey, the Israelites, again, presumably there were other people also afflicted by the Egyptians. It wasn't like they had something, well, they may have had something specifically against the Israelites. They may not have. They may have said, anyone who we can subjugate and make work for us, we will. And maybe those people also said, hey, the party's over, let's get out of here. Okay, so this is who we have from what we've read in Shemot about who the Erev Rav are. And now we're going to jump over. Any questions on this page or comments or thoughts on these different interpretations or anything we talked until now?
I kind of like the Shadals. I did a lot of head nodding when you read that one.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it makes sense with like what the language of calling them Heir of Rav, and I feel like that's realistic. Like, I guess I just don't realistically see a bunch of Egyptians authentically wanting to leave with the Jewish people. And then, or maybe there are a group that didn't want to go authentically. But I also just feel like that would be realistic if you were in Egypt for so long. Again, I don't know what interfaith exactly means because they're not really Jewish yet, but I guess that they just came from different backgrounds, different heritages. I don't know. I kind of like the Shadal's take. I'm still digesting though.
Right. And if you are going to assume that there were intercultural couples or offspring that resulted from the Israelites being in Egypt for so long, you have to ask yourself what happened to them, right? And this is at least one explanation.
We
say
know
that
of
they
one.
weren't.
There's
Yes.
one later in the Torah. V'hu ben ish Mitzri.
In the case of the Mikalel, when the guy curses God, and then Moshe doesn't know what to do with him, he's V'hu ben ish Mitzri. And there's a lot of midrashim about who that is, but yes, evidence that there were in fact at least one example.
Okay, so that actually ties together a few of these mefarshim, right? You have an intercultural person who then is a troublemaker and not exactly fitting in with the rules and the system that's in place now with under Moshe and right Sinaitic law.
It's also interesting that, like, just even connecting two of those ideas, that like somehow these people are the strangers, are the rabble rousers. Like, nobody inside is the rabble rousers, just these strangers. It feels like it's just going right into that stereotype in a way.
Right. Bad stuff's about to happen. And again, this is where it goes to, if you think about reading the Tanakh this way, if you're reading it straight through, you get to the story of Exodus from Egypt. There's something about Erev Rav. If you were just reading the Tanakh straight through, you might stop there and say, huh, that's a weird phrase. You wouldn't assume it means a whole bunch of people coming out. And in fact, I forget the exact ratio. I'm not sure I brought it here, but there's at least one place where it's suggested that the Erev Rav outnumbered the Israelites by like 6-1 or something like that. And so I'm not saying that's the fact. I'm just saying some rabbis, at least at some point, considered that as like worth considering. You wouldn't read that reading through. You wouldn't think that. And then you get later and there's all these troublemakers and you're like, all right, well, who were all these troublemakers? This is like, what is this going on? And then I wonder, it makes you wonder how we get to these different interpretations of who they were, especially when we see, as we keep reading about the Erev Rav, we're going to see that there are conflicting interpretations of who they were and what influence they had on the Jewish people. Okay, so now again, for those of you who have your own, who are following on your own books at home, we're going to Bamidbar, Perek Yud, Pasuk Lamed Gimel, chapter 10, verse 33. And again, we're going to read a nice long, long section in. Oh, I have it already open. In the Torah, we're going to read a very famous line that we read every week in shul. There we are. Okay, I'll do it in English again, except some Hebrew that we kind of have to read it in Hebrew. Where are we in the story? It's going to tell us right now. They marched from the mountain of the Lord, from Har Sinai, a distance of 3 days. The Ark of the Covenant of the Lord traveled in front of them on that 3 days journey to seek out a resting place for them. Okay, so here, where are we in time? They've just left Har Sinai. They're about to venture into the desert. And the Lord's cloud kept above them by day, and they moved on from camp. Here we get Vayhi bin so Aaron, Vayomer Moshe, Kuma Hashem, Vayafuto Evecha, Vayanusu Misanecha Mipanecha, Uvnucho Yomar Shuva Hashem, Rivavot Alpei Israel. Okay, so then we have the thing we read every week when we take the Torah out. When the ark was set out, Moshe would say, "Advance, O Lord, may your enemies be scattered and may your foes flee before you." And when it halted, he would say, "Return, O Lord, you who are Israel's myriads of thousands." Okay, so this is the first instance where we have the Jewish people traveling through the desert with the Torah, and we're getting a sense of how that happens with a pretty intense reliance of the Israelites through Moshe on Hashem to protect them. Now we're at the meat of what that was mostly for context setting, and now we're going to get into what this story is going to tell us. So what happens? They've just left Sinai. The people took to complaining bitterly before the Lord. The Lord heard and was incensed. A fire of the Lord broke out against them, ravaging the outskirts of the camp. The people cried out to Moses because there's a fire. They're burning. People are burning, or things are burning, or it's threatening them. The people cried out. Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. That place was named Tabera, which means something that was burned, because the fire of the Lord had broken out against them. Here's our word. This is the word that we were told about. Here's the word that we were told about by the Ibn Ezra. V'hasafsuf, and I just want to be clear, the Ibn Ezra was not the only, a few Mefarshim point out that make this strong connection between the Erev Rav and this word, the Asafsuf, and saying that they're the same people. It wasn't just the Ibn Ezra. The riffraff, the Asafsuf, in their midst, felt a gluttonous craving. And then the Israelites wept and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish that we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. Ooh. For those of you eating, I hope this is helping. Now our gullets are shriveled. There's nothing at all, nothing but this manna to look to. Now the manna was like coriander seed, and in color it was like bdellium. The people would go about and gather it, grind it between millstones, or pound it with a mortar, boil it in a pot, make it into cakes. It tasted like rich cream. When the dew fell on the camp at night, the manna would fall upon it. Moses heard the people weeping, every clan apart, each person at the entrance of their own tent. The Lord was very angry, and Moses was distressed. Okay, so they get out, they start complaining, a fire breaks out in the camp. They keep complaining. Now they want food. They want meat specifically, and we learn they have man. They have the man. It falls on the ground. It tastes like rich cream, or it tastes like something. Seemingly, it's a very pliable food that's available for them. It's left for them out every morning. They're complaining. He hears them complaining. God gets upset, and Moshe's worried. Moshe says to the Lord, "Why have you dealt ill with your servant, with him? Why have you done bad to me? And why have I not enjoyed your favor, that you have laid the burden of all these people upon me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I bear them, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries an infant to the land that you have promised on oath to your fathers?" Right? Like, these people are complainers. They're pains. Why are you giving this to me? Why are you making this my problem? Where am I to get meat to give to all these people when they whine before me and say, give us meat to eat? I can't carry all this people by myself. It's too much for me. If you would deal thus with me, meaning make me deal with all these people, kill me rather, I beg you, and let me see no more of my wretchedness. All right? Moshe's so fed up with leading the Jewish people that he says he'd kill me instead of having me keep doing this job. Then the Lord says to Moses, gather for me 70 of Israel's elders. Okay, so what's the solution? Let's get some help. 70 of Israel's elders, of whom you have experience as elders, and officers of the people, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and let them take their place here with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will draw upon the spirit that is on you, and put it upon them. Okay, so the Shekhinah, or the Ruach, the spirit that I have given to you, Moshe, I'm going to put some of it on them as well. They shall share the burden of the people with you, and you shall not bear it alone. And say to the people, purify yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat. Oh, it seems this is going to go great. There's going to be some other people with the Ruach of Hashem, and now they're going to get their food. For you have kept whining before the Lord and saying, if only we had meat to eat. Indeed, we were better off in Egypt. The Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall eat not 1 day, not 2, not even 5 days or 10 or 20, but a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you. For you have rejected the Lord who is among you by whining before him and saying, oh, why did we ever leave Egypt? But Moshe said, the people who are with me, so Moshe's like, God's like, I'm going to give them so much meat, they're going to be sick of it. They're going to hate it. They're going to realize how chutzpahdik they've been by saying that they wish they'd rather go back to Egypt where they had fish to eat. Moshe's thinking, I guess, like very practically, the people who are with me number 600,000 men, yet you say I'll give them enough meat to eat for a whole month? Could enough flocks and herds be slaughtered to suffice them, right? Are we going to literally kill all of our livestock to feed everybody? Or could all the fish of the sea be gathered for them to suffice them? And the Lord answered Moses, "Is there a limit to the Lord's power? You shall soon see whether what I have said happens to you or not." Okay. Moses went out and reported the words of the Lord to the people. He gathered the 70 elders and stationed them around the tent. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him. He drew upon the spirit that was on him and put it upon the 70 elders. And when the spirit rested upon them, they spoke in ecstasy, but did not continue. I mean, they prophesied or experienced nevuah. We have Eldad and Medad. 2 men, one named Eldad and one other Medad, had remained in camp, but the spirit rested upon them. They were among those recorded, but they had not gone to the tent. And they spoke, they prophesied, they spoke in ecstasy, prophesied in the camp. A youth ran out and told Moses, saying, "Eldad and Medad are acting the prophet in the camp." And Yoshua ben Nun, Moshe's attendant from his youth, spoke up and said, "My lord Moshe, restrain them." But Moshe said to him, Are you in charge of my account? I wish all the Lord's people were prophets, and the Lord put his spirit upon them. Moshe entered the camp together with the elders of Israel. We're almost there. A wind from the Lord started up, swept quail from the sea, and strewed them over the camp. Okay, so here's the meat coming. The quail is all over the place. About a day's journey on this side, and about a day's journey on that side, all around the camp, 2 cubits deep on the ground, okay? As far as you could travel a day's distance in every direction and, 2 to 3 feet deep. The people set to gathering quail all that day and night and all the next day. Even he who gathered at least at 10 homers, and they spread them out all around the camp. The meat was still between their teeth, not yet chewed, when the anger of the Lord blazed forth against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very severe plague. That place was named Kibrot Hata'ava, which means the gravestones of the desire, because the people who had the cravings were buried there. Then the people set out from Kibrot Hata'ava for Chatzerot. I know that was a long story. Let's remind ourselves how we got here, and then I want to hear what you all think. We had the Asaf Suf. The rabbis who read about the Heir of Rav said, who are the Heir of Rav? They're the Asaf Suf. They're the troublemakers. They're the riffraff who caused that whole problem right after we left Sinai. They said, where's the meat? We want something to eat. We had good food back in Egypt. I thought this was going to be a party where we get out of Egypt and make it to the promised land. And here we are in the desert eating whatever man is. Where's the meat? And it sets in motion a series of events that results in the forced feeding of the Israelite people, the death seemingly of all the troublemakers, although it's not clear if they're all actually taken care of, but the end of the story where we talk about the graves of those with the desires. So thoughts on what we just read? Connections to the other thing, or just this in itself? Yeah, Adana.
So first of all, the word asaf and the root shows up multiple times there. You see it vayesvu b'machana when they gather the people for who are going to be, when God says gather the Zkenim, the word asaf is there. Michael and I were just agreeing whether well, before that, whether it says velo yosef at the end, it's not exactly the same root, but and then after all of the Slav come, right, they're gathering all over the place, the asaf, asfim. So right, they're asfu, asaf, marim. So clearly there's some connection here between that asaf suf and whether the rabbis are the collection of the Zkenim, the elders, is supposed to be the counter, sort of a positive collection. There's a number of things. And then the other thing was, right, all the meat, right, the Heir of Rav comes with the meat, like with the cattle when we saw them in Egypt, and now we see gathering of the meat here. So
exactly, and a suggestion of killing all the cattle, right? God says, or Moses says, "What, you want us to kill all the cattle to feed everybody meat?" And great. Anyone else?
I noticed one thing about the 600,000 people, which was a number of people that exited Egypt. So that sort of says that the Heir of Rav were not many more times than the Israelites. Either that or they weren't being fed as part of this.
Right, exactly. Either they weren't there anymore, or they weren't part of it, or maybe who knows where the rumor of where's the meat started. But when Moshe was contemplating the math with God, how am I going to feed all these people? He's only thinking about the Israelites and their families. He's not necessarily thinking about if the Heir of Rav is in addition to the 600,000. Yeah, they're not factored into Moshe's planning.
Or if it was a few thousand and it's, just sort of a rounding error.
Rounded,
but it's not
right,
six
exactly.
times as many.
Right. Oh, right. Exactly. And that, which actually speaks to the interpretation that maybe whether they were spies or not, that they were kind of just mixed in with the people. It's a smattering of people. They've got some issues, and maybe they're complainers or maybe not, but they're kind of negligible. Right. They're rounded off at the end during the calculations. Great observation. What is our impression, if we're going to take for granted that the Asaf Suf is referring to the Heir of Rav and that those are the same people, how does that change our impression of who the Heir of Rav are? We read what we read the first time, and we had these different opinions about who they were. What does it tell you now?
Maybe that they are people who have influence and they're using it in the wrong way, right? So that shoresh of gathering, I don't know if I said this before, but like I keep thinking of the phrase like a mover and a shaker, right? That could be used positively, right? Like you make things happen, but like obviously it's a double-edged sword. But if you're making things happen, but you're creating a mob effect in the wrong way, then that's not good. And maybe that's what's happening here.
If you read the pasuk, it's actually, like Adina's mentioning, it's actually quite open to interpretation of what the motive of the Asaf Suf was. Now, unfortunately, we have to leave the translation behind a bit because it includes an interpretation. But if we read the Hebrew for verse 4, Ve'asaf Suf asher bekirbo. So now it's saying the Asaf Suf, which is some element that's within Israel, the Israelites, hita'avu ta'ava. Desire to desire. V'yashuvu va'yivku. Gam b'nei Yisrael. So now b'nei Yisrael is seemingly separate from the Asaf Suf. So the Asaf Suf is hungry. They're hungry. Now b'nei Yisrael look back or think back. The v'yashuvu is a really interesting language. It means like to returned or turned their hearts back, their minds back, their whatever it was. They turned and they cried, and they also said, "Mi yachilenu basar." So they instigated something, the Asaf Suf, either from intense personal desire, maybe because they wanted to cause trouble. And I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I think both interpretations are there, but whatever it was, the Israelites picked up on it and got out of control. They're the ones who then said, we remember the fish that we used to eat in Egypt, right? Further down, right? Like, why are we... Oh no, they don't actually say why don't we go back to Egypt, but they just say we remember what we had back in Egypt.
I think two things in that pasuk strike me. One is the gam, right? So we had the gam in the first mention of the Heir of Rav, where it was Bnei Israel, and then Megam as the second clause, and here it's flipped. But it also I keep puzzling over like, are they considered part of the Israelites or are they separate? And it's kind of, you're trying to get both in this pasuk. Asher b'kirbo, right? They're within the nation, but we're calling them out as a separate entity within the nation. So I think that's just interesting. Like it's really capturing the two sides of that in one phrase.
Though I don't know. I think I thought of that, Michael, but I was thinking that like, cause I was just going to look it up now, but I didn't have time. Like, you could have someone from the inside trying to bring you another way, and you still refer to them as like the Meraglim versus Bnei Israel. Like they're still called Bnei Israel. The Meraglim are from Bnei Israel, or Korach, and Bnei Israel's reaction to Korach. So I don't know that it's perfectly would necessarily prove that the riffraff are outsiders just because it says Bnei Israel is a separate entity.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Meraglim is my Mr. Parsha, so I just checked it.
Way to go.
Yeah, so it's Vayilonu Kol Bnei Yisrael. After the Meraglim complain, it says, and then all of Bnei Yisrael complained. That doesn't include the Meraglim, right? Like it's interesting.
Which is 2 chapters later.
It
So,
is.
lots of peer pressure happening, Aaron Steinberg.
It's a parable
there's
for
a lot of
fourth
peer
grade.
pressure.
Teach middle school.
I have a suggestion for this, but I'm curious if anyone else does. What is the most generous reading of understanding of the Heir of Rav at this point in everything we've read? Anyone want to offer a exceptionally generous read? Because the rabbis fall short at this point.
Well, that maybe this is not the Heir of Rav.
Assuming this is the Heir of Rav. Assuming this is
So
the
I
Heir of
think
Rav.
the most generous read would be to say that if this is the Heir of Rav, it's those that came sort of willingly. They're moved by what they saw, the acts that God performed. They came with Bnei Israel. They went out with them, thinking, "Oh, this is a great idea. This is like a wonderful thing." And then here, if we want to be, sort of most positive about them, what really happens then is they have second. They're second guessing their choice, and they're saying, "Well, wait a minute, this may not have been the greatest thing," and now we've lumped our fate in with this group. If we want to be generous,
I want to be even more generous than you, Mark.
Okay,
Listen, I think that was
please.
great, and I'm going to be even more. I'm going to be even more generous. Think about this.
Michelle Brody has an idea.
Oh, Michelle, please.
More metaphoric than it is in line with the story, but like thinking about them having a craving for being like a craving for something. Like if you're an outsider, maybe you have a craving to be more inside. And there's something about how it's being represented, the cravings being represented, not, as a hunger, but it's a hunger to be included. And so we it's like for them, they're trying to be included and they can't be included somehow. So they're instead just, it's very psychological. You have a psychological problem, so you eat your problems.
That's fantastic. And Michelle, I think you're spot on. And that what just happened? The Jewish people the Israelites just had the pinnacle experience of all Jewish history. They had Matan Torah. They got the Torah from God at Mount Sinai. They spent time there. There were some problems along the way, but they got there and they had this intense emotional religious experience. And we don't exactly know what happened there in terms of the Heir of Rav. We will mention that they were also considered potentially the troublemakers there as well. But putting that aside, imagine them on the edge of this. They followed us out. They thought, we're going to the promised land. And what do? They get to a mountain. The other group, whether that's the dominant group or maybe the smaller group that somehow they followed out, has this intense spiritual experience with God that they are at best witness to. The Israelites are literally full of their spiritual high that they've come off of from the mountain. And what do the Heir of Rav have? What do the Asaf Suf have? Nothing. They see everybody here full of everything, full of life, full of culture, full of everything, and they are desiring something. It doesn't even say they're hungry. The English says they're hungry. Tita'avu ta'ava, they desired something. They were empty and they desired something. And somehow that triggers among the Israelites, it wakes them up out of their again, their high or their trance or whatever they societally might have been through at Har Sinai. And all of a sudden, even though they've only traveled a couple days, now all of a sudden it's all gone. The Israelites forget the high of Sinai. Now they're just hungry. Now they're just complaining again. They just want stuff. Moshe, get us what we need. You're bothering us. We're not happy. And it goes downhill from there. And who do you blame? It was the Asaf Suf's fault. It was the Heir of Rav's fault. If they hadn't been there as a reflection or something for the Israelites to look at, it maybe would have never occurred to them. But it doesn't mean that they're at fault, right? They were the source of it. But it wasn't them necessarily that did anything bad, did anything wrong. But they were the outsiders. This is Team Israelite. This is Mission Israel. And someone's got to go down. And I think and the Asaf Suf is to blame. So we're running up on time. I know we're actually already over time. I want to share just one or two quick ideas, but this is the wide range of interpretations that I think we can legitimately have on the Erev Rav. A group of people who we hear about, sometimes they're mentioned in some communities, and I want to say this, that like the Erev Rav is still referred to in ways similar to how we refer to Amalek, right? When the Nazis rise up, we say Amalek. This is Amalek. This is a manifestation of a forever long people. There are people today in certain Jewish communities who, when they see troublemakers in the community, they refer to them as the Erev Rav. And that is an identity that still sticks with them today. At the same time, I'm going to hop back to my slides just for a second. Okay, that's the Zohar. The Zohar brings it. I couldn't find I don't study the Zohar. I'm not there yet. But the Zohar, at least I'm not going to hide it. This is from Wikipedia. Zohar says, the Erev Rav not only exists in each generation, but it continues to be the cause for most of the problems affecting the Jewish people. This part was in quotes. I don't know. The first part must have been a paraphrase. When the mixed multitude leaves the presence of the Jews, the verse, count the heads of the Jewish people, will be fulfilled. Meaning they're holding us back from being what we really could be. And some people, like I found like a Dvar Torah someone had written that basically said non-religious Jews, non-Orthodox Jews, they're either Tinok Shenishba, or meaning like a baby who's pathetic and we need to like teach, like who's been kidnapped and we need to teach it, or they are the Erev Rav who are trying to bring us down. But at the same time, if you look at Shmot Rabbah, this talking about who the mixed multitude were, the Shmot Rabbah says the proper ones of Egypt came and made a Pesach sacrifice with the Jews and went out with them, as it is stated, and the Erev Rav went out with them, right? Our tradition has space somehow for the Erev Rav to be the people who said, hey, you're leaving Egypt. We want to participate in this ritual sacrifice to your God who's saving us from Egypt. And we want to follow you wherever you're going. It's sort of like the Ruth story, right? Wherever you go, I'll go. And at the same time, we have space in our tradition to interpret them as the worst, sort of like a fifth column within the community. So, who are the refugees in the story?
We don't want to miss, Aaron. We don't want to miss something that I think is really an essential part of this, which is when it says who gets to eat the the Paschal sacrifice. Even the ger among you, as long as they just have to make sure that all the males are circumcised. It's really kind of the invention of the notion of a green card. These people are not citizens. They don't get to vote, but they have rights as long as they abide by certain specific laws. I think it's a real model of how you treat people who are not really you, but are among you.
Thank you, David. Yes, that's fantastic. And I'm going to go one more, which is quote this other verse, which is right in that same section, which is Torah achat yiheh le'ezrach v'lager hagar b'tochachem. There shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you, right? You need to treat these people fairly. You need to have laws and rules to accept other people into your society. And it cannot be a coincidence that the Erev Rav story is right alongside these rules about how you incorporate outsiders into the Paschal Lamb mitzvah and how you incorporate them into circumcision and joining the Jewish people, or even just being law-abiding citizens who live among you. Fantastic. Thank you, David. I want to add, there's a whole other section I can't even go through in terms of like where people read the Erev Rav into the text is certain instances of the word ha'am. If the Torah refers to the nation, the am, close to when it also refers to Bnei Israel, it says, oh, the am, that's the Erev Rav, and Bnei Israel is the, it gets complicated because it would imply, if you read that too strictly, it means that the Erev Rav are the ones who made matzah for the first time, and the mitzvah of matzah comes from the Erev Rav. It's a little complicated, but there's a lot of ink spilled on this, exploring this idea. I'm going to wrap up because we're at our time, but I appreciate all of you coming to study with me. I want you to just think about who are the refugees when we're thinking about refugee Shabbat and what that means to us today, right? Who are the people who come? What do they look like? Are we like, Bnei Israel is going through this split identity, and we're heading into Pesach, and we're going to be thinking about ourselves as if we left Egypt. And when we leave Egypt, I often think, okay, when we left Egypt, we were the refugees. We were fleeing a country because we couldn't stay there because it wasn't safe, and we were seeking refuge somewhere else. And I think we have to remember that within ourselves, we had our own group of refugees. We had a group of refugees, the Heir of Rav, who, at least according to some interpretations, were just trying to get along and stay along. And we also let them get oppressed, or at least we let them be maligned and scapegoated and blame them for some of our problems. And it's something that we have to remember, that despite, no matter how oppressed the Jewish people legitimately are throughout history and to today, we are also in the position to either be oppressors or saviors for other people who are similarly vulnerable. And just because we're on the topic of immigration, I thought I would just throw this in. Does anyone know who the famous person in Torah was, who was an unskilled refugee, fugitive from the law, quickly accepted in another land, given a job he had no qualifications for, raised a family, and ended up contributing greatly to society?
Sounds like
Moshe?
Moses.
I was thinking of Moshe. Refugee.
I don't think we should use that anymore.
Yeah, okay, fine.
At least use the cartoon version.
Scofflaw, fugitive. It was Moshe. We have this. This is in our blood. We are.
Oh,
we are.
Yaakov also.
Yes. Well, does he get all these? Maybe. Yeah.
Yosef also?
Right. Well,
Yes.
they were arrested, but they weren't fugitives. Were they? I'm trying to think. Moshe, he committed a crime and then fled.
So did
I don't know.
Yaakov.
So did Yaakov.
Stole the birthright.
Oh.
We have no information on Yaakov's prior experience with sheep.
But he definitely has experience with sheep.
Awesome. Well, that's it. I want to thank you all for joining. We can chat if people have questions or comments or thoughts. We can still hear, but I appreciate you
just
joining.
want to thank you, Aaron. That was
Yep.
really interesting, and it was so much fun to learn with all of you. That was great. Thanks.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Kara, what role did he play?
He was uncredited for this, although I've seen pictures. He played the elderly, oh God, I was just looking at it on IMDb.
Extra number one.
No, he was in a lot of movies. He was in a lot of movies at the time.
Cool.
I can't even remember. I was just looking what he played. The elderly treader. Uncredited.
I remember that part.
You have a picture?
Not from that. I'm gonna have to pull it out. He was, if no one on this call would ever see The Bishop's Wife because it's a Christmas movie, but he's in the very first scene. He's a blind man, and so if you want to watch like 5 seconds of it, Cary Grant helps him across the street as a blind man. So it takes 5 seconds, but we watch it every year, and then it's like, oh, that's
on Christmas or Hanukkah.
Cool.
Exactly. Just depends
So,
on
not
when
Easter
Hanukkah
Sunday.
happens, but
Not Easter Sunday?
Easter Parade, right? What's the
Easter
movie called?
Parade.
Oh, that's my favorite movie.
Oh.
The
Yeah.
Bishop's Wife. Yes, you can see. I can. We have a screenshot on Facebook, but yeah, he was in a lot of things. Lust for Life. He was Camille Pizarro. That's his biggest role, I think. Yeah. So, at any rate, it was just I know what I'm saying. Don't cancel the Ten Commandments completely. That's all. I'm sorry. What?
I said things you learn when you come out to learn on a weeknight.
Yes, exactly. I just think it's fun.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank
Thanks,
you. Thanks
guys.
for joining, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right.
Hi, good night.